Welcome to the Alumni Panel. So before we begin, if you could just take a minute and join the Slido here, which is how we'll be answering, and you'll be able to ask any questions. So please enter that code in, and from there you can like different questions you want to hear answered, so at the end we'll have some time for a Q&A with the audience. So right now we're going to be beginning our Alumni Panel, and as a senior, it's just really inspiring to me to see all of these great alumni come back and speak to us about their journey and their stories. And I'm super excited to hear what they're going to see, and I hope you guys all are too. So moderating this panel will be our great biology teacher, Teacher Johnson, who's also one of our diversity directors at the school. Sorry, diversity leaders at the school. So guys, take it away.
Thank you, Kavita. Kavita has been working so hard. So I just want to give, can we snap for Kavita today? I like that. She's working so hard. We appreciate you. Folks, we've got an amazing group of people here, so I'm going to just go down the line. So I didn't know this, but we are in order of when we graduated from Harker, so I think that's really special too. So right here we have Stephen Botte. Hi, Stephen. Welcome. On Zoom up here, we have Ashley Morishige. Ashley, can you please correct me if I butchered your last name?
You did.
Okay, I got the last name right. Let's keep going down the line. Amy Rorabaugh. Did I say that okay, Amy? Folks, just correct me if I say stuff wrong, please. I have no problem. Down the line, we have Daniza Rodriguez. Hi, Daniza. Welcome. We have Simar. Simar, can you pronounce your last name for us, please? Bajaj. Welcome, Simar. We're so glad to have you. Class of 2020. I meant to say your years. And then we're going down even further. Jasmine Wiese. Wiese. Thank you, Jasmine. I appreciate that. And at the very end, we have Allie Sommers, class of 2021. Welcome back, Allie. Allie's been gone for a while. She came all the way back. All right, folks, so we've got some people who are going to be rolling in. I'm going to go ahead and get started because we've got so much to hear from these folks. I'm going to just go in order of the folks. So, Stephen, you're first on our list. I have a question about your work in the tech industry in Silicon Valley. So you've been a manager in the tech industry and you've been involved in DEI initiatives. Can you speak broadly about the state of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, in corporate settings in the Valley? What changes do you think are necessary to heighten inclusivity?
Absolutely. And am I understanding correctly, we can lower our masks to speak?
I think
yes?
While you're speaking, you can.
Oh, I appreciate that. First off, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to come back some 40 years after I graduated. Maybe it's even more than that. I'm very lucky. I work for a tech company that's very forward-thinking. I was part of a grassroots effort to bring in some DEI initiatives. It is not my full-time job. It's more my volunteer gig. As a gay man, it was very, very important to me when we were starting the company to build this into the DNA of the company. So I would say that the state of DEI, diversity, are you saying equity and inclusion?
Yeah, we kind of broadly call it DEI.
Perfect. The state of DEI in Silicon Valley, from my perspective, is very, very good, to the extent that companies very much understand the value of it, that diverse companies, diverse boards, having diverse employees equals varied thinking, which equals perhaps better products, which ultimately equals a profitability. Unfortunately, we must always bring it back, it is my belief, to the business. So at the high level, companies understand the value, particularly after the George Floyd experience. Companies realized that they needed to do more. However, I would say it stops at about there. For instance, at my company, we have 1.3% of our employees are black. Black people are 13% of the population. Therefore, there's a huge disconnect. 30% of our employees are women. Far less than that are senior management. Women obviously are 50%. I'm in an industry of storage, which is predominantly white male oriented, but you see these numbers even at more progressive companies like an Apple that only really get good numbers by virtue of the fact of the retail employees that they have. So while corporations and the boards and the e-staff understand the value of diversity, it's not trickling down. We have to do more. We have to go out and hire more people. We have to retain them and develop them. The problem is people will say, well, there aren't enough people to hire. Well, you have to work really, really hard to go and find them. You have to build the relationships. You can't keep going back to the same pools of universities that you go to. You've really got to work hard to recruit those individuals and bring them into your company. One of the programs we do is that at West Valley, we actually have a program, Cisco does it as well, where minorities, traditional URMs, particularly Black and Latino, are studying the courses and the content that we need as an employer. So I don't want to end it on a negative note. It is wonderful to see corporations realize the value of diversity, but all of us must make sure that these companies, particularly in tech, that have so much money, are investing in hiring, developing, and retaining these individuals.
Thank you, Stephen. That was very thoughtful. All right, let's throw to Ashley. Ashley's up here joining us via Zoom. So Ashley, hello. Reflecting on your formative years at Harker, you once said that Harker provided you with the opportunity to simply be you. Can you elaborate on this, on how Harker let you be who you are?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the opportunity to join the panel, and thank you for the support around making this a hybrid event. And yeah, as a Harker lifer, I absolutely was shaped and grew up at Harker. There's no doubt about that. I joined the kindergarten in 1994, and then graduated from upper school in 2007. So I'm 32 years old now, and a married gay woman engineer, which I'm very proud of. And I think I appreciated at the time that it was a very good place where I could thrive and it was very supportive. But I appreciate it even more now in hindsight that I was given a lot of freedom to express myself through my appearance, my clothing, club affiliations, and just kind of how I presented myself. And I was cared for and loved by my fellow students, by faculty, and I think the diversity of the faculty also gave me role models of the bunches of different ways to be an adult out in the world. And I think especially now that I have experience in industry, I really appreciate that there were high academic standards and high expectations that was paired with belief in me and supported me. And I think equally importantly, is how I was conducting myself was impacting someone else's ability to be effective or was being too disruptive in some way. Someone would pull me aside and say, hey, let's talk about that. Let's do that differently. And so, having that thoughtful, caring feedback was super important. And I think that, I've seen that the most successful organizations, and I was Harker to be among them, they would figure out how to operationalize this combination of freedom, high expectations, and feedback that's really coming from a place of love and investment in fellow community members. So that's how I think about it. I still value that type of atmosphere and culture that I experienced at Harvard.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That's so sweet to hear as a teacher here. That's very nice to hear. Let's go down to Amy. Hello, Amy. You are a unique panelist for many reasons. You are a former Harker student, now a Harker teacher, and you were adopted by two moms. Can you share a special story about how growing up with two moms, or can you share a special story about growing up with two moms? And this is true in general, folks. Share as much or as little as you want to. I just want you to feel comfortable up here.
Wow. It's a little nerve-wracking to be up here, I'll be honest. I'm used to standing in front of second and third graders. I would say one of the favorite stories that my parents have is just me walking into a Disney store. And I walk in and I guess, my young self goes, I have two moms. And to me, this was completely normal. It was awesome. And I think just that idea of normal and just kind of accepting something like that without ever thinking about it was really great for me. And I think the other thing about Harker, kind of building off of what Ashley said, is they really are accepting. I mean, my parents went to the school and, one of the first things they said was, we want to be accepted, not tolerated. And Harker was so fabulous about that. They were like, okay, you're a lesbian, cool. Great, what's next? And I just think that was, something that I maybe wouldn't have experienced elsewhere. And so it was really nice to just kind of see that and feel that and not have to think, well, is this normal? Why is my family different? And the other thing of that was that I was adopted. So I didn't have, the typical mom and dad. I didn't have, a sister who came from the same parents. My sister is actually adopted from China. And so, another question I got all the time was, a statement, wow, you don't look like your sister. Well, yeah, I don't think I would, but, that's normal. That's to me, that made sense. I was like, well, we wouldn't. We come from two different families, but we're still one family. And it was just great to see, how much Harker and my friends and the parents were accepting of something that at the time was very different. It wasn't something that was common to see. It wasn't something that, maybe came up a lot. And so I would have to say just that idea of acceptance was a huge part of going through Harker. And, even as a teacher now, just the families, how accepting they are of things being different. Everyone having a little bit different family, a different background, different cultures. And it's great to see, some of the changes that have come even since I was here.
Thank you, Amy. Amy's a teacher here at Harker, and I've been teaching for a couple of years now. I've never met another adopted teacher, Amy. I am also adopted, so shout out to adopted families, too. Love to you all. All right, Daniza, hello.
Hi.
Again, you were a transfer student who went from a public school in East San Jose to the Harker Upper School. You were a student who discovered peers that seemed to be enjoying what we call the bliss of ignorance. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually transferred in my sophomore year. I came from San Jose High School, which is a little bit more downtown, Alum Rock, East Side. For the most part, I've always been in public school, growing all the way up from elementary school all the way up to high school. My family went through it, and we all went to the same schools. So we always had the same families, similar to what Harker has here. Similar, the families go through from kindergarten all the way, what we call life, K through life. With that, it's a whole different culture shock coming in as a transfer student because one, you're adapting to the atmosphere here. They talk about the ideal mold of a Harker student. And there's no real mold for that. Being on the outside looking in, we see these students and it's like, how do I connect with them? A lot of the students are taking multiple extracurriculars on top of high advanced academic courses. And I went to a public school. They didn't even have a valedictorian for kindergarten, but it was me. I was that kid. And coming into here, I was so happy to get my first B and be able to say, I worked hard for that. And the standards that you hold yourself to be able to compete in a school like this, it's totally different from being in an atmosphere like that. When I say a bliss of ignorance, it's a great thing to not have to see some of these struggles that students go through. For some of my friends, they were going through high school, middle school even, trying to figure out where their next meal was coming from. They were trying to figure out how am I going to get home because I live across town. I have to take the bus. Do I have money for the bus? Can I walk with a friend? And this safety environment here, it's really comforting, and it's a bliss of ignorance where we don't see all of these everyday struggles, but we can still not have that affect our daily lives. Being a part of those students, an example that I take is transferring in here. For most of the students that are here, I think it's similar throughout all the campuses. We come on campus, you put your bag down, you go to class, you come back, your bag is still there. Your items are still over there in the corner, you can grab them, go to it whenever you need to. When I transferred in here, that was shock to me. Being in a public school, if I have my backpack with me, it still might get things taken out of it. It still might have a hole into it, something where if I leave it behind, I might not ever see it again. And I would come here and kids don't use lockers because they don't want to. It's not because they're scared something's gonna be taken out of it, they just don't want to, they don't have the need to. Having that kind of security is something Harker, I think, hasn't emphasized enough, where it's a safe environment for students. It's kind of always been there, so it's not something that we have to look for. Whereas in public school, it's not always going to be there. There's not that cushion for that. So I think Harker's, to have that kind of ignorance, but still be enjoyable, is something so special to this campus and to the whole community as a whole.
Thank you, Daniza. All right, Simar. You've written articles for the New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, and the British Medical Journal with your wide-ranging on topics of wide-ranging disparities in research. What piece are you proudest of and why?
Yeah, no, and thank you for having me. I think the piece I'm most proudest of is the one I wrote for the New England Journal. I wrote it about a year ago, and it was on the topic of vaccine hesitancy in Black communities. So this was during the time, this is December 2020, and you look in the op-eds, you look in sort of what the media commentators are saying, and they're saying that the reason why Black people won't take the COVID vaccine, remind you that the vaccine wasn't out at that point, but the reason why they won't take it is because of Tuskegee, it's because of Henrietta Lacks, it's because of J. Marion Sims. This is really important moments in the history of science and really our history, American history. And I study the history of science at Harvard, and I'm well aware of these historical atrocities and sort of the impact they have, the legacies and the trauma that they elicit. But I think what was missing from that conversation was the notion of everyday racism. There was this notion that our current moment is rooted in these immovable historical atrocities, right? And we've moved beyond that we've solved racism, right? There's no notion that maybe the reason why there's lack of trust in the medical establishment today is because there's still racism today, right? There's still these pernicious effects of these historical atrocities that we're seeing today. It's not just something that we put in the past. So I wrote a piece for the New England Journal, pretty much laying out that argument, that these historical atrocities are important, we have to keep them front and center, but not at the exclusion of recognizing racism today, right? A common thing in our country is that the pain of Black patients is often denied and ignored, right? And I mean, just take an example. If you're in the clinic, right, and your pain is being denied and the doctor's not ignoring you, right, you're not going to be like, oh man, it's Tuskegee all over again. No, it's the racist doctor in front of you who is ignoring your pain. It's that relevance and that presence that we were ignoring to the detriment of in recognizing these present systems of oppression. So I'm proudest of that article the most. I think because of just the impact it's had. It's been read over 60,000 times. It's been cited by numerous news publications, US News, Forbes, et cetera, et cetera. And I think most importantly for me is that it's had an impact on sort of the policy conversation. It was cited in the Presidential COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force, as well as I found out today, a government document by the Dutch government. And I think, for me, that's why I care deeply about writing, I care deeply about research. But for me, research without that impact, research without that policy impact, where you're really moving things forward, is not that meaningful, right? I want to see what I'm writing and what I'm doing really making a difference in how healthcare is delivered, how healthcare is thought about in this country. Because it's not just about having another publication, it's about pushing things forward and building that ideal of a more equitable world for all.
Thank you, Simar. So we're going to move to Jasmine. Are you both class of 2020?
Yes, we
awesome.
are.
That is very cool. Welcome back. You were an exemplary Harker student when you were suddenly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Can you tell us how your life changed in the first 6 months post-diagnosis?
Absolutely. So the first thing that came for me with my diagnosis was actually a sense of relief, because there were so many little things that had happened in the previous year that I just couldn't pinpoint. I thought, like, what is going wrong? What is happening? And when I received my diagnosis, it was like a new kind of lease on my life again. Like, I had a reason for everything that had happened that I couldn't figure out. And in the 6 months after I was diagnosed, my life became more about shifting my mindset, reframing my life, learning the new normal. I think that's kind of a phrase that we hear a lot now with COVID, but for me, in the 6 months after I was diagnosed as a junior in high school, I was really learning that, okay, normal life is not going to be me before my diagnosis, me before I got sick. Normal life is going to be me learning how to manage my diabetes and me learning how to deal with all the ramifications, and also learning how to find fulfillment even after receiving the diagnosis of a chronic invisible illness. And I think that's especially relevant in today's circumstances, because that's something we have all had to do in the past 2 years. Whether or not we go back to our old normal or whether or not we can ever achieve that again, it's something that we all have to be aware of, is that in order for us to live fulfilling lives, we have to look forward. We can't look back to the past. We have to look forward and think, all right, we are resilient, strong people, and we're going to form our new normal, and we're going to find just as much fulfillment and happiness going forward. And for me, those 6 months were just a lot of time that I had spent thinking and just reflecting on myself and what I wanted to achieve and learning what I could achieve, learning my new limits, learning, not just how to plan, because a lot of diabetes management is just about planning for what's going to happen, but learning how to deal with the unexpected variables. So learning to plan and planning to live. And that was really the mindset that I adopted and have continued to carry through today.
Thank you so much. Folks, I'm asking really tough questions, so I'd be so appreciative for you all and everything you're sharing, seriously. Like, it's hard to be vulnerable in front of groups of people under all these lights, so big shout out to all y'all. Allie, hello. Allie's back from the class of 2021. Hello, Allie. Allie, how old were you when you began questioning your gender identity? How about when did you begin transitioning?
So I began questioning my gender identity when I was 15. I had a vague sense of things being off for several years, and it sort of crescendoed in high school, but I didn't have any notion of what it could be, so I just sort of, put it to the side and ignored it. But in 10th grade, when I was 15, I joined the GSA at Harker, and I learned more about dysphoria and what it means to be trans. And so during winter break, I started talking with the co-president at the time, and sharing with him what I was going through, what experiences I was having that was making me feel this way. And so over a period of like several months, I sort of figured things out, but I didn't start transitioning until around the end of the school year. I came out to the people in GSA only, and then to my parents and my brother. And so I used different pronouns for them, but to everyone else I was still my old name, old pronouns. And in 12th grade, once we started online and once I started to medically transition, I picked a name and became Allie to everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Allie. A big shout out to GSAs across the country. Historically, it was Gay Straight Alliance. It's now Gender and Sexuality Alliance. We actually have the GSA Affinity Group leader here, Mr. Olivas. Big shout out to Mr. Olivas and to all the GSA folks out there. Yeah, taking care of queer kids in schools forever. Love that.
The GSA was a very good place to have. It was very supportive.
Thank you so much. All right, back to the top. Stephen, hello. If you're comfortable sharing, please tell us how your experiences have shaped the parenting of your son.
Sure. I adopted my son when he was a baby, open adoption, and everything about being a gay man has shaped the way I raised my son. I would have been born a cisgendered white male, right? All that privilege. The fact that I am gay is enormous because it's given me, although it's an invisible minority status, a level of insight into my son as a black male that I otherwise would not have had. So he and I, he's 15 years old now, and we just went on spring break together. We drove to LA and back and had these amazing conversations in the car. It was worth every moment. And we talk a lot about things like race, etc. And to a certain extent, I can relate to what he's going through. I know what it feels like to be different, although it's very different because who I am does not walk into the room first. The color of his skin is what people see and judge before anything else, unfortunately. So I have an understanding, but I will never fully understand what it is like for him to move through life the way he has to. By virtue of that, I am Papa and Mama Bear. I will not tolerate any him being treated differently. And I'm so lucky that we live in this amazing bubble of the Bay Area that truly we haven't experienced it. At his current school, though, we just had an incident where a teacher, he was upset, he's 15, he's a freshman, right? He was playing basketball, the bell rang, blah, blah, blah. And the teacher said, "You're being a hooligan," which is a bit of a code word. So I asked my son, "How do you want to handle this?" And he said, "I'll handle it." And I said, "Oh, you go, well done." So he talked to the teacher, they talked about race, etc. So I'm so proud I've raised a boy who can be aware of his race, discuss it, and that I am able to support him through this difficult journey.
Thank you, Stephen. A lot of adopted stuff going on here. We didn't plan this. Just to know adopted folks are in our community is very lovely for me, and it's an important part of who I am, so I'm just expressing that to you as well, Stephen. Ashley, up here on Zoom, hello. As you progressed on to college and graduate school, did you find an accepting and supportive environment? If not, could you speak on that as well?
Yeah, no, I feel very fortunate that throughout my academic life, I found a supportive environment where I could succeed. So after my 13 years at Harker, I went on to Sarah School of Engineering at Dartmouth, undergrad, and then I went on to graduate school at MIT. And my experience at Harker and at Sarah School and at MIT was, one of lots of resources, both academic and personal, a diverse student body, and an environment where, I could really do well and learn. And so, I'm really glad to say that I did not perceive that I was subjected to discrimination or, a feeling of otherness in those years. Definitely want to be clear that, I'm really proud of those institutions and groups that I was part of. We're very intentional about DEI, and it was prioritized and it was effective. I think more and more organizations and companies are doing that and seeing the benefit. And because I've been fortunate throughout my academic career, it was, I was in my late 20s before I really first experienced discrimination that I couldn't brush under the rug and, something else. So.
Thank you, Ashley. All right, moving on to Amy. As a student with two moms, did you have some experiences where you felt excluded from your peers?
Family trees. Those were always very interesting growing up. You would have, like I said earlier, kind of the mom and dad, and then you would have your siblings. And for me, it was always kind of like, ooh, how do I build a family tree when my family's not, kind of like everyone else's family? And it's interesting because I did a project this year with my kids, and I said, we're not doing family trees, we're doing family posters. And so just for them to bring in pictures of their family, they were so excited. It was so much fun just to see the difference from, when I was growing up till now. I think the other thing would have been holidays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, right? Who do you write to? Which parent do you choose? Do you only do Mother's Day? Do you only do Father's Day? Those kind of things were not trying to be exclusive, but they were just inherently exclusive because they were specific to gender at the time. I would maybe say those are kind of the bigger ones. I would say maybe books. I love books, typical elementary teacher. My room is full from side to side, wall to wall with all the books. But it's a very different narrative, I think, that they tell nowadays. I grew up, with books all about white kids. Every single book, every single character had a white person in it. They had the stereotypical family, mother, father, sister, brother, and that was it. And nowadays you just see the range in literature and how amazing it is. We have books with, two dads, we have books with two moms, we have books with divorced parents, and it's just great to see that change, not only in that aspect, but also in race. I mean, I don't have a classroom full of books about white kids. I have a classroom with books that focus on different cultures, on different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and even I sometimes find myself picking up a book that, I thought, oh, I knew this, but I didn't, and I learned something new, and it's just so amazing, not only through the stories, but through my students themselves. They really do teach you a lot, and it's amazing to kind of see that, progression from when I went to school and, kind of went through that, and then nowadays they get to have all these great discussions. They get to see more of an open, forum to discuss and to see different characters and all that.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for sharing. All right, Daniza, you identify as a Latinx person and were among the first in your family to attend college. How did your cultural background and your upbringing impact your time at Harker? At some point, did you have to do some code switching?
So, my ethnicity, I am half Mexican, half Japanese. I often get mistaken as Filipino or some kind of Polynesian, which is totally normal. But with my siblings, one side looks more Asian, one of my sisters, my other sister looks more Hispanic. Not one of us grew up in a household that speaks Spanish. Nobody in my household can speak Spanish. But when I got here to Harker, I was one of, 4 Mexican kids in my class, one of 12 Hispanic kids in the school at the time. And I was expected to be in AP Spanish instantly because I could speak Spanish. My last name is Rodriguez. I should automatically be in that class. And it was different. It was like, how do I fit in as a Hispanic person? Growing up with all of my friends, they were more cultural. They have a lot more traditions and things like that. Don't get me wrong, my family eats all the Mexican food and Japanese food we can find. But can we make most of those? Probably not. Can we pronounce most of those? Probably not. It wasn't until I got to college that I my introduction to Spanish was here. A deeper dive into it was Spanish Cultural Night, when I started to realize that you don't have to truly be a Hispanic ethnicity to be able to speak Spanish and take on the culture. And it made me feel a little bit more at home because I was learning alongside of other people. When I chose to go off to college, I went down to Southern California, and I started to dig more into my Latin culture, my Latinx culture, because there's a difference between being Hispanic, being Latino, or Latina, and being Chicano, and embracing those environments and those, the different expectations in those environments. There's different levels to it. So for me, coming in, I always would hear little words, as small things like, oh, vete, like go that way, go get this, tráigamelo, like, bring that to me. But for us, we never use those. And when I got here, you start to pick those up. For me, growing up, I never expected to actually be in touch with that Hispanic side. And I think that going off to college as a first generation Hispanic is amazing for both my Japanese side and my Mexican side. I'm a first generation student for my family. So be able to have that opportunity to go to college and be able to bring something back to the community here really just helps build that kind of character where you're okay to learn or you're okay to be any different level of your ethnicity as long as that's how you identify and to be proud of it. Being in that environment, again, with my last name as Rodriguez, I get classified very easily as I have to be Mexican. Okay, let's ask the Mexican person this question. Can you translate this? General population, we don't have parties with sombreros and always have tacos. It's just a classification that we come across as a stereotype. And I think growing up with, or at least going through Harker and understanding that there's different levels for that, really made me a more proud person of who I was, being a first generation Latinx person and being able to get my degrees for high school and for college.
Thank you so much, Daniza. I love talking to y'all. Y'all are very inspiring. Simar, I've got a question for you. In 2021, wow, that was recent, you had an article titled, please correct me if this is wrong, Superhuman, but Never Enough, Black Women in Medicine, published in The Lancet. Did I get that right? That is an awesome title. Is there a quote from this article that encapsulates the intersectional racial and gender bias that is faced by the African American female physician and scientist?
Yeah, no. I'll preface this by saying that I do a lot of my research with the superstar physician at Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford. So she's a black woman physician, and I think it's really talking through her, working with her, that I'm able to start to think critically about these issues and more deeply. So the argument in this paper was really one of, sort of, as you mentioned, the intersectional burden faced by black women physicians in the US and really the world. I think intersectionality is a really important conceptualization. It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw some decades ago. And essentially what it says is that there are these overlapping systems of oppression that burden these people that stand at the intersection of multiple identities. It's the racial biases, it's gender biases for black women physicians, for example. I think the quote or the idea really from that article that, at least for me, encapsulates as well, is that in 2021, there was the first black female chair of surgery ever. That was Dr. K. Marie King at Albany Medical College. That's 2021, right? That's last year. That's alarming to say the least. First, a great accomplishment, of course, but alarming that it took so long. I think the point, though, that is less often stated or understood is that we had also the second one in 2021 at Howard University, or the second black female chair of surgery. And one of the lines in the article was making the point that black women physicians are often seen as less qualified, less capable, less able, right, even within their own spaces of HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities like Howard is. And I think that's important to consider, right, because Howard University didn't elect the first black female chair of surgery. They elected the second. And that's not necessarily to say, they should have done the first, they should have stepped up or whatnot, but it's to make a broader point about the fact that we can't look at identities in a vacuum. We can't look at them as separate, right? They don't just add neatly on top of each other, right? There's this exacerbation when you have these multiple disadvantages in many ways. And I think when we think about disparities and health equity and just equity more broadly, I think it's important to consider that when you have these multiple intersectional identities, they compound upon each other. And oftentimes, those people are the ones left out the most, right? There's a bucket, let's focus on black and white disparities. Okay, let's focus on male-female disparities, right? People don't often put them together. There isn't much research in that domain, right? The doctors will say, the end's not big enough, right? There aren't enough people there to study, right? Which is more an excuse than reason. And it means that oftentimes there's this mix of hyper scrutiny and obscurity. And that was the main point of the argument, right? That comes back to the title, superhuman but never enough. That black women physicians and other people of intersectional identities, right? They're scrutinized, especially looked after. Every small thing, right? It holds great significance. Right, but then obscured also, right? Hidden in the mass, right? There's no place for them. And I think that's an important thing as we're thinking about equity and thinking about the spaces we hold and take up, right? Just how we think about people coming from multiple different backgrounds.
Thank you, Simar. Great work you're doing over there. All right, Jasmine, I've got another question for you. In a typical school setting, there are accommodations made for students that participate in extracurricular activities. As a student with a disability, did you feel that similar accommodations were made for you? What additional accommodations could have been provided for you that maybe weren't at the time?
So to be perfectly honest, I don't think there could have been more done for me. I think Harker just made it so easy, for my parents and just for all the teachers involved. They just made it so easy for me to go from someone who didn't have any health issues to someone who had something that severely impacted my life. And I just remember I walked into class, the first day of junior year, and I went to every class and I told my teachers, and they were all like, okay, all right. And then we built a plan, we worked with a nurse, and we built a plan that worked, that really allowed me to succeed. I think, a lot of people say junior year is really stressful in high school, but for me, that was just like such an easy year. It was so smooth sailing because all of my teachers were so accepting. They understood that I had a condition. They understood that there were accommodations that I needed to have, like if I needed to have food during a class, if I needed to leave a class for a reason, if, I needed to have something extra, they were really, really there for me and supported me through everything. And, you know, I have to shout out Miss Chetty because I was in her human anatomy and physiology class my senior year of high school. And, you know, having type 1 diabetes and doing a lab practical or doing a dissection, you don't really want the two to mix, because for me to treat myself, I need to have access to glucose. So a juice box, glucose tabs, stuff like that. And I just remember one day I looked at Miss Chetty and I was like, very calmly, I said, I'm gonna put the scalpel down and I'm gonna take off my gloves, I'm gonna wash my hands, and then I'm gonna walk out of this room because I need to treat my glucose levels. And she looked at me and she was like, okay, you do what you need to do. And I think that level of trust, that level of understanding in me and knowing that I could manage my condition and that they would be there to meet me halfway really, really enabled me to succeed. So when I look back, I just don't think there was, you know, there wasn't more that needed to be done. There wasn't more that could be done, because they really did everything I needed. They really made it possible for me to succeed academically, for me to feel like emotionally and mentally supported as well. And I really, really appreciate that. And I think that's something that I just, you know, when I reflect on my time at Harker, this community gave that to me. They gave me the support that I needed so I could be mentally and physically strong so I could achieve my own goals.
Thank you. Allie, coming back down to you, a similar question, but again, feel free to be honest. I love that answer. What support systems did you need? What support systems maybe were not offered to you when you needed them?
So, like I mentioned, the GSA was a fantastic place to be able to go and be supported. Everyone there is just awesome. People with knowledge and experience who know what you're going through, who you can share things with and that you can trust. So that was really invaluable. And I was, in time, I ended up being one of the co-presidents, so it was very rewarding to, in a way, give back to the community that I had gained so much from. In terms of what could be done more, at Harker at least, I know there were some consistent pain points that a number of people had. Bathrooms and Eagle Buddies were two pretty big ones because, I mean, I can't get too specific, but it took me a decent amount of effort to get a straight answer about the bathrooms from the administration. And with Eagle Buddies, I don't know how that ended up getting resolved, but we had a lot of issues with people wanting to change their name with their Eagle Buddy or their pronouns, and the resultant questions that might ensue from that. And parents didn't want, some parents were not comfortable with the students addressing that, but that also led to this vague scenario where they can't really use their real name. So those two were really, I think, the main issues that could have been improved, at least at Harker. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Allie. I really appreciate it. Back here to Stephen, it's our third question. Can you share an experience in either an academic or work setting where you felt excluded because of your sexual orientation? And again, feel free to share as much or as little as you feel comfortable with.
Sure, I thought about that, and again, very fortunate to have always worked in the bubble of Silicon Valley, so being confronted by homophobic behavior was reasonably rare. But I remember, and I will say the company, I was at Cisco about 10 or 12 years ago, and I was moved into a new role, and they decided not to move me into the role because they felt I was probably too creative for that team. And at the time I thought, oh, what a shame that they're not a very creative team. God, that's their loss. And it took me a while to realize, oh my God, what they mean is, I'm the big gay man, and this was a southern US-based team. And I think if that happened to me today, I would have handled it entirely differently. At the time, I sort of just accepted it, and I thought, well, thank the gods that I'm not going to be working with this team that's not going to understand who and what I am. Instead, I was assigned to, a team on the West Coast that was wonderful, and I was able to be exactly as creative and the person that I am. But that's incredibly sad that, that was a code word that was used. Just like a word was used with my son, that word was used with me. I hope that these companies have learned, although, oh God, there's still so much incredible racism, sexism, homophobia in these companies. There's so much work that we still have to do.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to everybody for just being honest. Like, that's all we can ask of you here. I really appreciate that. Ashley, we're going to go back to you. Oh, I like this question. As a young student of biology, I'm a biology teacher, so I like this question. As a young student of biology, you learned about historical examples of women scientists who were not duly recognized for their contributions. Do you believe we have come a long way from the days of Rosalind Franklin and Marie Curie? Can you offer personal examples to support your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, we have made significant strides, even during my lifetime. And I think, something that's really exciting to see is that as more and more leadership positions and, the senior individual contributor roles are filled by millennials, and as we welcome members of Gen Z into the workforce, I think that will only continue to accelerate. I'm making an effort to keep in touch with and work with people who are older than me, people who are in my cohort, and especially people who are younger than me, because even though I like to think of myself as young and spry, I'm already collecting little pieces of myself that mark me as like kind of a stodgy millennial. So I think as those generational changes occur at the rate they are, I continue to be optimistic. And I think the mental model I have right now of DEI, especially in STEM fields, is that DEI improves at the level of best practice. And so the most successful organizations follow many best practices, whether that's workplace safety, quality control, good customer service, using resources efficiently, and also creating a workplace that's about respect and dignity and appreciation. And so I think about my own career so far. I've had the opportunity to be part of several different key transition points for the organizations I've been a part of. And I think in these moments when it's high stakes and high risk and it feels like there's a lot on the line, I think those have been when I've had the best experiences and also the worst experiences in my career. And so, just as one example, I had the opportunity to help bring a product from R&D to market. A really great thing that happened to me was that I was recognized with a promotion and a raise. On the other hand, one of the lowest moments of my career was when it happened when I was part of what I now know to be kind of a struggling organization. I was asked to join an in-progress meeting with an external partner because my expertise was needed. And so I walked into the conference room kind of mid-meeting, and I was looking for a chair. I saw a chair that seemed to not be being used. It was, next to one of my executives. And so I, kind of a social courtesy, I said, is this chair open? Right? Is it okay if I sit here? And his response to me was, you can sit in my lap. And, at the time, I didn't really say anything, right? And I kind of played along. And I think, in that moment was when I understood much better, why people don't speak up or push back, when faced with poor treatment. In that situation, there was a huge power imbalance. I was, much more junior, much younger, had, many, social disadvantages, and speaking up felt way too risky at the time. And so, fast forward into, how I set up my life now, I think because there's always this possibility that, we'll be faced with situations where moral or legal boundaries will be sort of pushed. My wife and I have been very intentional about building a reserve of resources, whether that's emotional or social or financial. And doing that has enabled us to conduct ourselves with authenticity and integrity in our careers. Right? We're fortunate that for a number of reasons, we have a life where only one of us has to have a job at any given time. And so if we see something that doesn't work for us, we don't have to go back to work the next day. So, I think I'm happy to say that, the most functional and the most successful companies or organizations get that DEI as a best practice. And I would say that, places or groups that do DEI poorly also do many other things poorly. And they're increasingly failing and getting left behind. So I'm optimistic about where this is heading. And I feel fortunate also to be part of that culture shift.
Thank you, Ashley. A lot of wisdom in this room here today. So we're going to go back over to Amy. Amy, we've got a theme here going. As a Harker community, what do you think we can do to be a little bit more inclusive?
Just even listening to the other panel members, the changes that have been made from when I graduated in 2010 to all the way to 21, I think Harker's off to a great start. I think continuing to have these discussions to see, what do the students need? What are they asking for? What are their needs? But also, not just the students, the parents as well. I've had some amazing parents come last year and tell their story on Zoom because it was an option. And it was just great to hear, the background story of where they came from and what they're doing now and how they got there. So just being able to have that kind of diversity in conversation come in. I talked about books earlier. Again, books, as an elementary teacher, they're my favorite. I love to find new books that, my students will be engaged in, and they'll say, oh, that person looks like me on the cover, and just that wide range that's happened. I know at the upper school, I'm sure you could talk more about this, but they, were in discussions about doing affinity groups, and I think that's amazing, being able to group together with people that you have things in common with. It's not always easy to find as an adult, and I will say, I kind of miss that about high school. It was a lot easier to find people who had things in common, whereas now you really kind of have to search for it. But it's a step in the right direction, and change takes time. It's not something that's going to happen right away. It's not something that we can flip a switch and say, oh, we're 100% a DEI school. It's going to take time, and each year it changes as well, which is one of the great things. We evolve and we change, and just hearing, the other stories from, our more recent graduates on the panel, I'm so happy that, the changes have been made, and the students seem more, encouraged to be themselves, and just to kind of have that. One story was that in 2010, I think we had some of the first gay students kind of come out and go to prom, and at the time it was a big deal. It was like, oh, you're going with a girl? Is that allowed? That was kind of the question that came about. And for my friend, she just was like, yeah, I'm going with a girl. And, the next year there was a couple more kids who were like, oh, it is okay. I can be myself. Maybe I can try this. And just seeing that progression to now where the alum are just doing amazing things and coming up with all these great projects and all that is just really awesome.
Thank you, Amy. All right, folks, I think we're going to do one more question per person. I think we've got enough time for that. So, Daniza, I'm going to go to you. What would you like to say to the parents and to the students in the audience today?
I'd like to say Harker is an experience that you make out of it. When I transferred in, I could say I hated the school. I was scared to be here. I didn't want to be here. It was just a whole different atmosphere to get adapted to. And being in high school, we're teenagers. We don't want to make those changes so late. I was so used to having friends at my old school. I've been going to school with them since I was in kindergarten. And now here I am, a sophomore. getting ready to take my PSAT, and I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't have any friends here. Transitioning over into my senior year, I didn't want to leave. I loved being here. It was a whole different atmosphere. That first year, that first semester, I met some really great teachers that really kind of like checked in with me and said, what is going on? What do you want out of this? Because don't fight the changes that you're here with, embrace it. See the community. It's just a whole nother adaptation to your lifestyle from where you were before. It's not trying to change who you are. Think of it as a compliment to who you already are. Add the atmosphere around you, add the people around you. These are just more friends that you can make. And I didn't have that mindset until that second semester coming around, when I really started to dig into the school's community and get involved in a lot more clubs and activities and things. So basically just get involved, find the niche of the people around you. There's so many things that are going on. Harker has so many opportunities, so much diversity. You can celebrate similarities and still have your differences within these clubs, these activities, these events. But it's really what you make out of it. What you go in and find and make out of that experience is what's going to come along and carry you through. That's one of the reasons I came back to coach. I'm actually the girls' varsity coach here. It was just the atmosphere of those teachers, hounding me and really embracing the community, my peers around me, that made me want to come back to this community and really be involved and hope that I can spark that light in some of the kids that I now see.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Daniza. Simar, I'm not going to ask you about your research. I want to get to know Simar. Having gone to school in the Harker bubble and then interacting with students from diverse backgrounds such as diverse race, diverse ethnicities, diverse cultures, socioeconomic status, etc. at Harvard, what is something you would like to see changed in traditional institutions like schools and universities like Harvard and Harker?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting question. And I think something that we brought up in this panel is that Silicon Valley is a bubble. Harker is a bubble, right? I mean, you don't have to look far to understand that there's not necessarily a traditional mold, but there's a lot of people who look a certain way. There's a lot of people who think a certain way, who come from a certain background. And I think it's unfortunate. This panel has made clear the value of diversity, right, on all fronts. Yet, we still see that, in our Harker population today, right? It's one major area where I think Harker could do a lot better, right? We do have quote-unquote diversity, right? But not in the number or the way any of us would like, I think, right? And I think that's one thing that, Harvard is a little bit better on that note, but not all the way. But that's one of the things I really valued when I going to Harvard. The diversity of experiences you see on all fronts. Race, ethnicity, income, right? Educational status, so on and so forth, right? It's really a gift. You learn so much from your peers when they come from such different backgrounds and are able to tell you and teach you and give you a sense of what that is. You won't be from that background per se, but you can get an insight into it and learn from that. I think when we think about traditional institutions and what we can do better, I think it is really about intentionality, right? There's a common graphic that shows the difference between equality and equity. It's one where there's a fence and there's a baseball game. And there are these people of different heights, and equality is this idea that, okay, we'll give them all one crate to stand on, right? So we give them the same thing and that everybody's happy at the end of the day, right? But that doesn't solve necessarily the structural issues that are at play. The tall person can still see the baseball game. The short person isn't able to see it at all still. The idea of equity is tailoring your intervention, tailoring your what you're giving. So you give one person 2 crates, you give one person no crates, you give people what they need and what they need most. I think that's the most important thing. You can't wait for equity or diversity to come to you, right? That's not how the world works. You have to be intentional. You have to be thinking about, as I think was raised before, right? In the workplace, where are you recruiting from? Where are you looking, right? In education, who are you reaching out to? Who are you trying to build bridges with? I think that's the most important because, again, it's easy to take a hands-off approach. We're doing our best, right? But that best is often used to to hide and mask, right, that really we aren't doing anything at all. We're just expecting that they should come to us. Oh, we're inclusive in our admissions. Oh, we have a special preference and whatnot. I mean, that's just the theme that as I've been thinking about my research, as I've been thinking about my work, and as I've been thinking about my place as a student and as a future physician, right? How can you be more intentional about equity and really take the first step yourself, right? Rather than being just passive.
Thank you, Simar. Very, very thoughtful. Jasmine, how important is it to be your own best advocate?
It is so important. I think everything in life that you go through, you are the only person who has that full experience. So in my case, again, reaching out to my teachers the day after I was diagnosed, going and talking to them, putting that plan in action. I've always been a fairly social person, so for me, I think I'm open and I'm happy about talking about the fact that I have a condition that's considered an invisible illness. But if you looked at me today, right now, you don't see my insulin pump, you don't see my continuous glucose monitor. If I didn't talk about it, nobody would know. And they wouldn't necessarily look at me and think she has a physical disability, much less think about the mental aspects of having a physical disability. And I think a lot of times, if I don't advocate for myself, if I don't say, hey, I actually do have something, and it is actually considered a physical disability, they don't see that at all. And so if you want to be understood, if you want to be heard, it starts with you. It starts with me. All the conversations that I've had since going to college, they start with me. I have to start the conversations for my accommodations. I talk to my professors because I have to be the one to let other people know this is the status of my life. This is the status of my condition. This is where I am. This is who I am. And so that being said, I think everyone here on this panel today, I'm sure, would agree that you are your own biggest advocate, and you are, of course, the central player in your own life, and you'll be the most important factor in kind of determining how all of that plays out. And so in my experience, you have to advocate for yourself. There's no shame in advocating for yourself, and advocating for yourself is really the best thing you can do to ensure that your life is the way you want it to be.
Thank you so much. All right, well, throw it to Allie. Allie, finish us off. I've got a question for you. If you could tell people what questions not to ask, what are those questions? What are some of those questions that you do want people to ask?
So, obviously, medical stuff, don't ask about that. What surgeries are you or will you be having? What genitalia do you have? Never ask that, because you would not ask that to anyone else. It's private, so yeah, don't do that. I do like people to double check on pronouns if they're not sure. That generally goes for everyone. But yeah, just try to not ask anything that you wouldn't ask a cis person, because it is still private information. It is still, and don't ask, what's your dead name? Because no one wants to talk about that. So yeah, just try and think about what if someone asked me this question, how would I feel? And try and go off of that as a guideline.
Thank you for sharing that, Allie. Folks, it's just about lunchtime, so I think we need a round of applause for our absolutely incredible panel up here, folks. So yes, thank you to you all for being here today. I think that's all we have for now. Ms. Chetty, is that correct? Okay. We've got something for each of you.
Can I just say something? As a future alumni, it was so great to hear you all talk and sharing your stories. It was really incredible. And on behalf of Harker, I'm happy to announce that we hired a DEI director, which is so exciting, especially hearing all of you guys talk about how important diversity is. And having been at Harker since kindergarten, it's so inspiring to have the school work to better itself in this way, and also how I can continue to work on these efforts as I go into college. So with that said, thank you guys all for coming, and I'm just going to be handing out the gifts.